Hello everyone, welcome back to our studio. Today we have an episode dedicated to the graphical interface, its technical aspects, and therefore we have a person in the studio who is actually responsible for it. For the technical implementation of the graphical interface in the Korea IL2 series project, Andrei Korchinsky is responsible. Andrei, hello, hi. And so, accordingly, today we will discuss what the graphical interface of Korea represents in terms of technology. With Zhenya Isayev, when he was in our studio, we discussed graphic design. We will discuss more when he joins us again and share a lot of interesting things. But today it's about technology. And since it's about technology, then, of course, the first question any user would have is, why are you changing these technologies regarding great battles when everything seemed to have already been settled? The answer is probably quite simple. Here I'll provide the introduction. It's all very simple. The technology used in the Great Battle series had quite extensive capabilities. It was Scaleform from Autodesk, but unfortunately in 2018 Scaleform was essentially discontinued and is no longer available. Moreover, I believe from 20-something, you can't even buy a license for it anymore. So if you are doing something, even with the old Scaleform software, you won't be able to make a new game. It's just not possible. Now we will talk about why Noesis was chosen among all the current options available on the market. But first, let's explore why Noesis is actually better than Scaleform, because there are certain advantages, even though Scaleform is made by a huge company like Autodesk.
Yes, Scaleform was a popular technology for graphical user interfaces, but even if we had the opportunity to continue working with it now, it would have been blocked by several things. For example, we switched to DirectX 12 and Scaleform. Scaleform basically didn't support it. It was just a technical limitation that wouldn't allow it to be used. And the second thing which many people complained about in Scaleform is that it has performance issues. Because with this software package, it is an interpretable language. It is something you could sort of call a virtual machine. The interface of Scaleform, it is kind of convenient to work with. It is easy to work with, yes, but the result that comes out, it is quite slow to process. So, because of that, we found that the passage of time forced us to switch to a new technology. But even if there wasn't such an urgent need, the transition would still make sense simply because Scaleform was already outdated. This simply was because it no longer provided results that met modern requirements.
The only advantage it had, which no modern user interface engine available on the market has to this day, is the editor that comes with it. Yes, a visual editor. It was in Scaleform, and Autodesk could afford it. What is an editor? It's when an artist has a graphic editor and they arrange and move blocks, like doing layout, like in some Photoshop. Now it's not quite like that, but it seems no one really complains either.
Yes, we're managing, when all things are taken into consideration, generally speaking, you can talk about what advantages Noesis has, apart from its speed, that's for sure. Actually, when it comes to this software, it's quite an interesting thing when you look into it more deeply. This is a Spanish company, I think. They took an existing technology from the Microsoft Visual Fox Pro programming language, which originally dates from the 1980s, and implemented it in C++. Then they completely rewrote it all from scratch. So even though the editor is absent as such, you can use the tools programmers are already familiar with. Also Visual Studio. Even Noesis is creating its own studio now, but it's still rough there, so we don't actually use
Well,
it.
the idea is so obvious that
Yes.
one would want an editor, but an editor like Photoshop is not
something
written
like
quickly.
that. But they are definitely trying. In fact, you have to say they are really responsible guys. I periodically throw some problems at them, and they do fix them. They certainly cooperate quite well now. I also want to say an interesting thing. Originally, when Microsoft was creating this Visual Fox Pro, they thought that designers themselves could also do the layout almost directly in Visual Studio or a separate product like Blend. But as practice has shown, programmers are still needed there. That is, designers can do it with their familiar tools, but then a programmer must come and implement it in an effective, adequate form, because the technology is such, it has its complexities, which a designer, for example, would hardly be able to master. That is, it may, to some extent, slow down the work, but the result is, how do you say, high quality? When already a programmer who knows how to do it optimally takes on the implementation of the design already planned by the designers themselves.
On the other hand, there is a pretty clear division of roles here, meaning there are programmers who they implement the design specified by the artists, and the artists who work with this design in another tool, for example in Figma, prepare this design accordingly. And for example, in the case of Scaleform, when we were looking for people to work on it, there it was much harder to find a person, and the simple reason for that is that it had to be someone who had good programming skills and a person who had good designer skills simultaneously. In other words, one had to be proficient in both skill families, which is a rare thing to find in someone. Speaking of programmers, what kind of qualities would you highlight? For a programmer who works with Noesis, using this graphical interface development environment.
This is very interesting because, once again, all of this Visual Fox Pro technology originated from Microsoft's developers. So in response, I would have to say, there, the so-called automatic interface and data linking is used. That is, the programmer does not need to manually update the text in a field or change a picture, for example. Instead, they change some properties in the code, and the interface updates them automatically. And it requires a certain mindset or experience to get used to it. Because when it comes to Microsoft products, this is a common approach, and for programmers accustomed to other technologies, they try to command the user interface in a direct manner instead of allowing the user interface to update itself on its own. However, using this type of approach imposes certain requirements on the UI structure. Needs to be well thought out, especially in terms of a code. It also requires a certain experience, which, how to say, not everyone has it. That is, if you just take a programmer who made Office programs, how to say, arranging tables and text boxes, it's not that difficult. And when we have a rather complex UI in the game, we need to think about how its different parts will interact. So how to say, experience is very important here. The experience of such a user interface that lives on its own, which you cannot literally command, but which, how to say, it doesn't depend on how your data is structured. So again, this all happens. Maybe for a game engine it wouldn't be so important, but since the technology is constructed like this, it requires knowledge of the separation, presentation, and data.
It should also be mentioned here that in this case the programmer should be somewhat of a game programmer, in the sense that they understand what games are. After all, in our interface, part of the game logic is implemented in the interface code, if you look at it career-wise. So like if we take the gameplay code, It's basically about how some elements of the game affect each other and what follows from what. It means there is game design involved, which I am talking about now. And this is also implemented in the graphical interface. This was actually the case in Great Battles, and it will be even more so now, because in Korea, we have already talked about this. A career is no longer a pilot's career, but a regimental commander's career. This means there is much more functionality in the meta part of the graphical interface. There is resource management, personnel management, all of that. And all of this has a specific logic programmed within the graphical interface. All right, so on that note, when it comes to talking about new features and such, what sort of new things would you like to highlight for us that we have managed to implement in Korea so far, and that we might not have had before in all of our Great Battles series of titles?
From a graphical point of view, it's very interesting that we've completely switched to vector icons and vector graphics for all interface elements. In Great Battles, I saw there were quite a lot. Actually, there were pictures showing different states of buttons, states of the same pilot in statistics, and something else. And in Korea, we do this completely vector-based. This will allow us to display high-quality graphics on any screen resolution. And in Noesis, it's very easy. This literally doesn't require any. The designer draws a vector image, and I insert it into the interface data almost as is, and we use it. We can color it in different colors, for example, to show the state of buttons. And based on this, we also have an interesting feature, a new cockpit scheme, which is also a vector illustration, where designers can now label certain elements, and consequently we can make them interactive by showing hints on the screen. For example, what is this cockpit element and how is it controlled? And it's quite easy to manage. This, I believe, is a big plus of the technology.
The map elements again, right?
Oh, yes.
Various
the
icons on the map.
The so-called tactical layers, yes. Before
Earlier,
you could see all of
pixels
this.
were visible. When you zoom in, pixels were coming out. It was a raster format in scale form, but here it's vector.
Vector. And because it's so simple, I have a dream to give the community the possibility to add those tactical layers, for example, in custom missions, if possible, of course. Not only in career or in campaigns, but directly. So, roughly speaking...
So it's a roughly speaking, we just specify a path to some vector file that we drew in some vector editor, for example, and overlay it. Well, maybe something else.
Besides the vector, well, it's not easy to say right away because I'm not very familiar with the inner workings of the Great Battles interface, but we have separated most of it for
yes, it's a big topic.
New control management schemes. Yes, it's actually a separate topic. In Great Battles, basically, there was no way to control the interface except with a mouse. Yes. And here we are paying a lot of attention to control, like, for example, with a gamepad. In such a simple case, actually, I, for instance, play quite a lot with a gamepad, and so because of that sort of thing, how to say it, we want to be able to navigate the interface using big real joysticks, since they have hat switches and enough buttons.
Well, they're even called HOTAS, meaning hands on throttle and stick. And this is usually perceived as a characteristic of the device in the game itself, how it is used in a mission, how it is used in flight, that you can fully control the flight of the aircraft without taking your hands off the throttle and control stick. When we think of virtual reality device, we want the game to be playable without a keyboard and mouse from the moment you hit the launch button, for example in Steam or the launcher. And so that you don't have just to select a mission, take off your VR goggles, look at the desk, fiddle with something with the mouse, and also look at the monitor where everything is out of the corner of your eye. It's all very inconvenient. And if accordingly you have to enter something using a keyboard, well, it turns out to be inconvenient too. And here the idea is that it would seem that while we primarily implement this for simple game controllers to lower the entry threshold to the game, it will in fact be perfectly applicable and a great addition for those who use complex input devices like HOTAS joysticks with many buttons, axis and VR. For them, this will be a mega feature.
Yes, a lot of attention is paid to this in both design and implementation, and it takes quite a bit of time. We are spending quite a bit of time ensuring the correct operation of handheld devices, like, let's call them, well, gamepads. But essentially, this also includes any HOTAS devices and joysticks.
So, listen, we didn't really talk much about your background when we started talking today, but you were actually doing something like a career or mission generator, weren't you, even before you got involved with the Korea project?
Yeah, sure.
So, it's not your first time, generally speaking, doing things related to mission generation, and specifically mission generation for the IL2 world.
Yes, I am familiar with this topic and have been interested in it for quite a long time, you could say, since the time of Rise of Flight. I studied the possibility of creating a more interesting interface for mission generation. Actually, in Rise of Flight, I once made a popular mod for player gameplay a long time ago that allowed for photo reconnaissance. You can say that was my first real introduction to the internal workings of the interface. Well, the generator wasn't mine. I also made a small, well, maybe not so small, but also popular mod for it. Which allowed people to launch it directly from the Rise of Flight menu. People seemed to like it.
Well, yes, this is one of those really positive examples of mods. Mods vary in quality and usefulness, but this one was really one of the cool ones. So let's continue about Noesis. You had different thoughts about what could be told, what interesting features it allows to implement, right?
Well, this is not so much about the features, but maybe more about controls. If you could share a few more details.
Let's go.
All right, so for one thing, we studied the topic of gamepad control. And in the process of doing this, we were able to implement several new features related to the interface. For example, being able to connect joysticks even after the game has started, since this is something that the game itself has to understand. The interface should also recognize, I have a new device, and along with this, the interface now allows for displaying different control tips for different types of devices. For example, if only a keyboard and mouse are used, then there either hints are not needed at all, or they show hints with the keys themselves. If you connect a gamepad, then the buttons of the gamepad will appear in these hints. In general, this is a fairly common feature, quite obvious. But still, it had to be implemented in the new interface that we have been developing, researching how to implement it and how to successfully integrate it. As for such general features, I just thought of an interesting point worth mentioning. We are making the interface in C++. It's a programming language we use. On the one hand, Noesis is its own native language as well. although they offer other options, C++ is its main version, and we were also thinking about trying it, but we ended up choosing C++. And how to say, I don't regret it, but C++ is such a unique programming language for the interface. We have programmers who are not familiar with C++ in general, but are familiar with interface technologies. People are surprised, but as it turned out, it doesn't cause big problems for anyone. People get used to it, and as a result, it allows for very effective integration with the game. Because the UI lives somewhat separately from the game, but since both the game and UI are in C++, they interact almost seamlessly. It interacts well and quickly. In general, so far I like it. The UI is very responsive and fast. What I started with was that scale form was slow, but because of this I was able to make a very fast UI.
Well, at least our game loads several times faster now.
From loading the game, it is also related to the new UI technology.
Yes, I mean in Great Battles it is of course also related to the amount of content there, but the game loading time can reach up to a minute, and here in the new UI, well, how much? Probably 10 seconds
Probably
now?
yes now. That sounds about right.
Yes, it's a lot faster now than before. Well, at this point in our conversation, I would like to pivot a bit, and I would probably like to talk about another thing, which features beside as career-related ones we plan to implement in the new interface from the end user's point of view. Well, for example, what I am talking here about are things like they were asking here, yes, we might be able to incorporate some features from Air Marshal, in particular, for instance, map annotations, which they will be transmitted in an online game. That is, one player on a team will be able to leave a note on the map and write something there. Here, I don't know, an ambush. And accordingly, they will press a button, and this thing will appear for all players on their team, and other things like that. As you can probably see, there are very big changes awaiting you in the aircraft setup dialogues. The approach to this has been completely changed. It's a completely new so-called user experience that is concerning how the user interacts with the game world. There will be, well, many other things. Basically, is there anything else you'd like to add? Because we pretty much covered
we
the
mostly
main points.
discussed all of this, and you remembered the map well too. The map was one of the first things I started working on in the new interface because it's an important element of any. Well, anyway, yes, and yes. Now, partly because we are supporting gamepad, interacting with the map is a really different experience now. There are active points on the map that can be selected with either a mouse or a gamepad. Special features have been made. We now have an assist for targeting these points, the so-called gravity. And in general, technically, because we've significantly overhauled the map functionality, we can indeed easily add these Air Marshal functions there. We have found out that the technology for adding these sorts of things is very flexible.
Well, not all of it, of course. Air Marshal, yes, I emphasize. There was a whole story there, equal in scale to a career. Formation of a squadron, division into groups, sending commands to groups. It was a really ambitious endeavor. Of course, this won't be the case here, but we will definitely add the basic features that have long been needed by everyone in multiplayer.
Yes, now it will turn out that the interface will not limit us much going forward. There are other difficulties such as network transmission or something else like that. But adding such functionality that improves the quality of life and enhances the quality of the game has become quite simple.
By the way, what was the problem with Air Marshal? most of the functionality was implemented, but the issue was with debugging. There were performance problems, specifically related to the map, because as long as the map did not have dynamic functionality and was just a means of reflection, everything worked fine there. And as soon as a bunch of vector information was added to it, Scaleform immediately said, oh, unfortunately, we were not able to optimize this.
Yes, and now this problem won't occur any longer. And actually, that's partly because we use C++. All of these graphics being rendered on the map are still drawn using Noesis, but now various drawing algorithms for some tricky things. I'm trying to think, what's it called? For instance, like when we draw specific zones on the map, they have also become very fast, how to say, they are very responsive in terms. So in regards to all that, you can definitely say that...
When it comes to those things, I have a lot of high hopes in this direction, yes.
Not everything, of course, will be immediate, meaning not everything will be in the release, but what I mentioned will most likely happen. And from what Andrei says, it can be quite obvious that the technology is quite easily developed. So this means that following the release in Korea, we can expect many more years of improvements, including for this technology.
About the controller features, perhaps it's worth adding that this is a particularly useful feature, as they say, long requested by our players. The desire for 128 buttons.
Oh, yes. There
was such a limitation in the Great Battles series, where for some reason only 64 buttons were supported. However, our research for the new user interface for Korea allowed us to finally solve this problem. And it is also fixed in Great Battles now as well.
I think it was related to old versions of direct input, something like that. But since then it has been updated, yes?
Yes, it all, how to say, has its roots back to the age when it all started with Rise of Flight.
Yes, it was a legacy limitation with the way things were coded back then. Well then, we'll really be wrapping up here. Andrei, thank you so much for coming today. We will have more topics to discuss with Andrei and many other developers from our team. I hope it will always be interesting for you. But if you liked it, be sure to like this video and be sure to subscribe to our channel. And please follow our updates on our social media. Feel free to ask questions. This time we didn't answer questions because the topic is very specific. Regarding the technical aspects of the graphical interface, it's unlikely anyone had direct questions. The questions that were asked were more about design. It's better to discuss this with Genya Isaev. He will come back. We'll talk to him again. But how it's done from a technology perspective is, of course, also extremely interesting. I hope you found it interesting as well. Bye, everyone.